Welcome, everyone, to the Happiness Journey with Dr. Dan podcast, where every journey is worth living. My name is Dr. Dan, and I'm your host for today's episode. I'm a bilingual cognitive behavior and neurolinguistic programming practitioner specializing in anger management issues, both court appointed and private, marriage and relationship coaching, dissociative disorders, narcissistic personality disorders, depression, anxiety, dream analysis, and also provide life, business, and retirement coaching support. I provide individual one-on-one session in both French or English, and also do group settings. If you need any assistance, reach out to DMV Therapy and Coaching Services at 301-325-1550, and our website can be found at lifecoach.drdanmzallag.com. In today's seventh episode of season 33, I'm very excited to have Linda Knipe as our special guest, expressing how toxic and damaging shameful thought can be in our lives and how therapy, when one is brave enough to stick with it, can create valuable changes in our lives. She will also be sharing her difficult journey with us after dealing with severe PTSD due to being raped. Now, without further ado, and as with all of our previous episodes, I will leave it up to the guest to properly introduce herself, as no one else can do a better job. Linda, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dan. I'm so excited to be on your podcast because I think it's an important topic. And anytime that I can convince somebody that if they've thought about therapy, they should probably look into it, um, is a good thing. So my history is, um, as you said, I had some rapes in my background. I actually grew up in a really large, loving family, where I had rose-colored glasses and had never thought about the possibility that something bad could happen to me. And I think I was very ill prepared for it when it did. Um, when I was when I was living on my own, quite far away from my family, I had someone break into my apartment. It was a stranger, um, and raped me. And I was a young professional, and I managed everything pretty well in my life. I had a professional position in a company, and so I just told myself I could manage that, and I put it away. I went through the legal process. I actually caught the guy,
Well,
and so went through the entire court process, and then put it away and moved on with my life. I got married. I had kids, and I went back to college when I was 40, for counselor education graduate degree. And in the end of the first, I had had a bad experience with therapy soon after it happened. It was the wrong therapist and the wrong approach. And it felt terrible. So I asked the question when I was at the end of this first class on counseling theories, if there's ever a time when you feel worse instead of feeling better. And it had been 18 years since that rape. And the therapist or the professor got pretty quiet, and he said, well, in the instance where there is a sexual assault or a rape in your background that you never dealt with, and then you go to therapy, it's going to feel worse for a while before it feels better. And I felt like I had had somebody throw a bucket of water at my face, and I was I didn't even listen to him after that. I was just trying not to blink because we were in a small group setting at the point. And so I started immediately with full blown PTSD. When I walked out of class and I got in my car, I felt like somebody was climbing on me, and I couldn't stop that feeling. And I just, more and more crazy symptoms started to escalate. So after a couple of weeks, I went back and talked to the professor, and he told me, he explained about PTSD and told me I was really going to need to find a therapist to talk to, especially because I was going into a counseling program, but also that um, at that point, you may be able to bury the stuff again, but it's going to pop back up. And if I wanted to deal with it, so I needed to find therapy. So that was the background. And I started in therapy I was in therapy for almost 5 years, and there was other stuff going on. There were a lot of complicating factors. My marriage was on rocky ground to start, and I absolutely wasn't going to talk about my marriage. And I had a date rape in my background that I never identified as a rape. And I felt humiliated about that, and I was never going to talk about that. So I went into therapy, determined that there were things I was not going to talk about, and I stuck to my guns for a long time. So it took a long time for me to heal.
So do you think that if you were more open about your the demise of your marriage and the challenges and difficulties, do you think you would have healed much faster?
Oh, absolutely. But I had 3 young boys, and we had a life built up. And even though we knew things were rocky, probably just a few weeks into therapy, my therapist said to me, "Well, we haven't talked about your marriage yet. We can talk about that next time." And I said, "My marriage is just fine. We don't need to talk about that." And that was many, many years ago. And he still will bring that up once in a while because it was so obvious that that needed to be talked about. So I knew that if I talked about that, that it I think I knew that the marriage wouldn't last if I really faced that.
So when you went to therapy, Linda, the modality that was used to be able to treat your PTSD, was it like the EMDR? Was it any was it
No, no, it was cognitive behavioral therapy.
Oh, CBT. Okay. Okay. Okay.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
for when it comes to actually dealing with people or having to deal with people who have gone through something similar as you, do you have like some kind of gift or skills to be able to know that, okay, if they try to avoid talking about a specific topic in their life, that's what we need to focus our energy on.
That's what I tell them.
Okay.
I say if it's making you uncomfortable to think or talk about that, that's exactly where you need to be.
Okay.
And I this is not an easy it's not an easy fix. And I guess the two is when you and I talked about where this discussion could go. I think the things that apply to most everyone are that idea that people are so hard on themselves, and things things that you do that you ruminate over, and maybe they embarrass you, maybe you think you should have done something differently. um, you're hoping people don't notice, and you're not going to talk about it. And the funny thing is, Dr. Dan, when I have talked about the book in circles of accomplished people, I did a presentation at a Rotary, and I saw people in the room who I knew were accomplished business people and community leaders. When I was talking about keeping things to yourself and beating yourself up because you are embarrassed or humiliated about something that you did or said, and you just can't deal with thinking about it or talking about it, that stuff is toxic.
Hmm.
And as long as you hold it inside, that is a feeder for depression like nobody's business. And I think what I found with myself, because I I was the good girl in a large family, and I would just go along and try and do everything right. And so I kept a lot to myself, and I beat myself up a lot um, because I think that a lot of accomplished people, and I found this with uh, teenagers that I worked with that were very accomplished, that they're the ones who will take any kind of correction that people give them innocently, and they will just go to town on themselves and start really beating themselves up. And how could you be so stupid?
Yeah.
And I saw that when I was speaking in it was several times that I spoke in um, author talks to people that I knew who the people in the room were. And when I saw them shaking their heads yes, it was like going back to those accomplished students that I used to work with, that that they just when they feel like they did anything wrong, they beat themselves up and they won't talk about it. So for myself, when I would do that, I would do that with anything that I felt kind of embarrassed about. And once you get to the point where you're depressed, a lot of times you don't remember where the depression came from, what precipitated it. And you've got more than one thing in there. And so everything feels so chaotic and overwhelming in your head that you really can't, you feel like you can't talk about it. You feel like you could never explain to anybody what is going on in your head. And I think it's because you've got so much stuff piled up in there. There are things that you haven't wanted to talk about. And a lot of times you just can't even put your finger on it anymore.
Yes, unresolved issues. I mean, if you don't address it, if you don't confront it, it's always going to be resurfacing someday or another. And the
Right.
thing that's where EMDR, when I asked you originally, this is what they do. You just kind of like you process the trauma, you accept it, and then you move forward. But ignoring it will not really solve any problem.
Yes. I will tell you, my the 5 years that I spent in therapy was a good 20 years ago. And I had heard about EMDR. We had some speakers who knew about EMDR, and I went to my psychologist, and I was having such a hard time talking about, especially the date rape that I felt so humiliated about. And I asked him about that, and he was not trained in it at the time, and it was fairly new.
Yes.
But I've always been really curious because I know people who have used it and practitioners who have used it, and I know how effective it is. Yes.
Absolutely. But is it common, Linda, that a lot of people, when things happen that are completely out of their control, which means that they never really contributed to the actual challenge that they face, and if they cannot control it, they will automatically accuse themselves of putting themselves in that situation because they cannot change anything that happened. So they will take the blame. They will say, it was my fault. I dressed in a certain way that kind of caused people to look at me in a very sexual way, and so on and so forth. So, do you think that sometimes people tend to go through this route?
Oh, I think people do that all the time, and I'll tell you what I've come to come to realize about that. And it was really it became really obvious to me in the last few months that I, I was I was out in a social situation, a lot of people I didn't know, and there had been a traffic accident with a father and his kids
Mhm.
in the car, and there was no blame attributed to it. There was no blame in the news articles that were written about it, but I heard people making suppositions about what he must have done wrong, like maybe he was drinking or maybe the kids weren't belted, or and it was all and I was thinking, why are they doing that? That's just cruel to
Yeah.
put more on this poor guy. And then became really obvious that people do that because they want a sense of control, and they feel like if they can attribute some sort of blame that somebody did something wrong and just feel like they would never do that, they feel more control than just realizing that, life happens and things happen and you can't control everything. But I
Right.
keep seeing people really working hard to try.
hmm Yeah, but when it happens to you personally, then the whole narrative changes. Then you say, oh no, it was completely out of my control. But if you look at it from the third eye perspective, then you will come up with a lot of assumptions.
Yeah, and I think that I know that I spent 20 years after those rapes probably being pretty difficult in my marriage because I was working really hard to control everything. Because life, even though I didn't understand that connection, life felt very scary. I was very scared for my kids, and so yeah, you become a lot more controlling in the way that you handle things, and it does affect your relationships. I said to my doctor one time, it was just it was surprising to me how insidiously it got into every part of your being over the years.
hmm And do you think that at a certain point when you try to control everything, because the one thing that you could not control was the rape that happened a few years back, so because of that, this is what you feel brought down your marriage?
No, no. My marriage, I still adore my former husband, but we were a mismatch.
Okay.
And yeah, we didn't approach things the same way. We were a mismatch, and we were plugging away at it, and I don't know if things would have been um, been able to. I don't know if we would have been able to make it if I hadn't had that history. But I don't know if I would have married him if I hadn't had that history.
Ah, good point. So did
But
you?
what I do know is that I met and married after that. We both found our partners that we were meant to be with. So when I look back, I'm thrilled about our boys and that we all have a good relationship. But his wife and my husband, who is now deceased, were the love of our lives. So
So
that's just part of life's journey.
yes, oh, it is certainly. But do you think that when you got married to your first husband, was it something that, he tried to be a savior to you, and that's why there was the connection at the beginning, where you were the victim and he was the one who was trying to take you out of this vortex of sadness?
Huh. I can tell you're a therapist. I Nobody had ever asked me that before.
Well, I'm very known to be asking very, very tricky.
Um, I don't know. We clashed right from the beginning, and it was very unusual because I had a lot of joy. There was either a lot of joy or a lot of pain, and that was not usual in my life. I had a much more even keeled life than I did with him.
Mhm.
And he was in his life, that's how he was used to living. That's how his family lived, with much higher and lower emotions. And I had always I was much more middle of the road. So that was big. But the joy in all of the relationship was wonderful.
Was,
So
was he ever
yeah,
diagnosed with bipolar disorder?
pardon?
Was he ever diagnosed with bipolar disorder?
No,
Okay.
no, and he didn't have bipolar disorder. He didn't have anything like that.
Okay, because you're talking about like high and low emotions, a huge variation of like the ups and downs, which that can cause obviously.
Right. Well, that also, I mean, there's also, things just that you carry from. Okay, I will tell you what he said to me one time, which is just a great way of thinking of it, that we go through life collecting garbage in our own little garbage bags, and we drag it along behind us, putting all of our garbage into those bags. And then we meet the person that we're going to spend the rest of our lives with, and we take our bags and we dump it over their heads. And that was our relationship.
Okay.
The stuff that he brought forward in his background, and I know that the stuff I brought forward from my background, we were dragging along with us, and we dumped it over each other's head. And
Wow.
we both also went into therapy at the same time. His was a little different than mine, but um, we decided at the end that we needed to split up because we are also doing couples therapy.
Mhm.
So we decided that we needed to split up, and everything got better from there on out. Um, we had an amiable separation and divorce, and we have parented our kids and grandkids beyond that point. So
And at this point in time, when it comes to um, any triggers that you have experienced, Linda, about that specific moment, either the person that did the unspeakable thing about the rape and all that, if let's say you come across someone that looks somewhat similar, is there any triggers that come to the surface and then you
I
feel like,
used to. I did that, stayed for a long time, and my therapist just gave me um, some really good visualizations and thought um, strategies to get me out of the trigger. The only thing that's left over, and I never realized it until fairly recently, is I do still freeze when I feel like someone is attacking me verbally, you know.
Mm,
When you're in a um, when you have a disagreement,
mhm,
um, if you're able to, if your mind is able to put all of your thoughts in an organized fashion, and you're able to state, non-judgmentally how you feel about things, or what you're thinking, or what you know, those are great in times of those conflicts. They're happening all the time now.
yes.
Um, but for me, I avoid those because I know that the minute somebody speaks to me passionately,
Mhm.
I go into a freeze mode. And I didn't realize that that's what was happening until just recently, when I really thought about my response, and the fact that I can't think it through because I'm just in this is a dangerous situation. I need to get out.
But someone who speaks passionately versus in a condescending way are two different things. I mean, I'm not sure exactly how or why you feel that that passion, the way they speak, is a direct attack towards you.
Well, I don't think, I think that the times that I felt that way, that I felt more attacked. Like, people now, even on different sides of the political spectrum, uh, are characterizing people on the other side as being hateful, and are speaking passionately that way. And I just, that is still difficult for me to navigate without taking a step away and organizing my thoughts. Like, being in the moment of it is really difficult.
Oh yeah, when we talk politics, yeah, this is definitely a different beast.
Yeah, so it's stuff like that. It's stuff like that, and it's anybody who has bought into a conspiracy theory.
Mhm.
And if you start questioning the source, then they really get their back up. So
Well, yes, I mean,
those kind of conversations are really difficult, and I wish I were better at them, because there are some people who are good at them, but I'm not.
well, we cannot be good at everything, right, Linda? So
Yeah.
there's a few things. But when it comes to, did you say that if you wrote a book about your story, or I forgot it?
Yeah. No, I wrote a book called Braving Therapy.
Okay.
It's the subtitle is Rape, Buried Trauma, and the Triumphant Journey Over PTSD. And the other thing, we were talking about buried thoughts, and just the fact that they're toxic. They make you sick. They control the way that you respond to people, and the way that you operate, to keep the narrative, to keep control of the narrative, um, while you're beating yourself up. So that is not healthy. And my understanding, I read a book when I was when I was in my graduate class, by Scott Miller, called The Heroic Client.
Mhm.
And it really put the it really attributed the change in the work and the difficulty of it all to the client who stays in it. And that was really the message that I wanted to pass along. And in Braving Therapy, therapy was the hardest thing I ever did. It really was. But while I was sitting there, really struck, because in cognitive behavioral therapy for rape, sexual assault, things like that, you are discussing what happened, and it's bringing up the feelings that you have worked hard to hide. You shove those feelings away. You can't process them. So you just shove them away, and those feelings come back up. So it's really difficult. And it's not just difficult sitting in the therapy room, it's difficult when you go home. And I would write about, I have journals and journals and journals of going through that time. But it was transformative. And I knew when I was going through it, I was thinking to myself that when I was sitting there in the therapy office, that this is the hardest thing I've ever done, but I know I'm changing. I can feel it.
Okay.
And I was just reading a book by, it's called The Tools by Dr. Stutz. I can't remember his first name. He's a psychiatrist, and was talking about the doing things that are really hard, in that what you have to do is just tell yourself to go toward the pain, because we're all avoiding the pain.
Correct.
And going towards the pain and just saying, bring it on, is where you can really make change. And I realized when I read that that's what had happened in therapy for me. It was so hard, and I was just determined to stick it out. And because I stuck it out, my whole life changed. You know, I transformed into really an authentic individual. I don't have things like anxiety and and a lot of the problems that I had before. I don't deal with depression. I had severe depression for a long time. Um, and I don't feel like I need to control the way people see me. I don't have negative self-talk. I had negative self-talk most of my life. So all of those things were transformative. And that came from staying in therapy. And I think from one of the things that was a real surprise to me after my book came out, I have about 80 reviews, and about 60 of them are from people who do not suffer from PTSD, but they do suffer from things like depression or beating themselves up. And all of them, I got almost all 5-star reviews, and all of them talked about their own journeys with depression and realizing what was required to change. And that was eye-opening. And I also had so many people say, you know, I started therapy so many times, and then I would feel better, and I'd stop, and then things would get bad again, and I'd go and I'd start therapy again. And my what I want to really pass on to people is that when you get in therapy, you need to stick with it until you really know, until you and your therapist agree that you're done. And I think once I stopped having like a lot of the PTSD symptoms, I kept waiting and wondering if I was done. And my therapist was like, you are not really experiencing your life. I was very closed off to my emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And I almost didn't understand what he was talking about until all of a sudden all of my emotions flooded in. And it was transformative. But I will tell people too that when you keep those thoughts to yourself that you're ruminating on, and you will not talk about, they're embarrassing to you, you're only getting your own perspective.
Correct.
And
Yeah.
I found from my brilliant second husband, who was he was college administrator and advisor and just a wonderful counselor. And he would sit me down the last 10 years of our marriage, when I was starting to let things from work and stuff get to me, and I hadn't talked about them, and I didn't even know what it was that was making me feel kind of depressed. And he would make me talk. And when I finally brought out the stuff that had happened that I was embarrassed about, he gave me such non-judgmental, different perspectives that I stopped judging myself. And that's what happens when you start sharing what's going on in your head. You find out that other people think of things just the way you do. You're
Absolutely.
not alone.
And it reminds me actually, Linda, when you talked about the example to stick with therapy, I compared therapy with when you have a bacterial infection, when the doctor gives you the antibiotics to be able to take for 10 days, even if you feel better after 3 days and you stop, the infection will come back. So you have to
Yes.
take it for all the 10 days, and then you're sure that the bacteria is completely eliminated. But that's how
Yes.
I compare it in a way. But on that note, Linda, that is all the time that we have for today's podcast. And again, thank you sincerely for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us. And we all appreciate your participation to this episode by sharing with us the importance of getting help when it comes to dealing with any type of mental illnesses to avoid long-term negative effect when not addressed in time. Now, to our millions of listeners out there, we hope that you've all enjoyed today's episode as much as we did. And also, we're very excited of what's ahead of season 33 of the Happiness Journey with Dr. Dan podcast, featuring a lineup of incredible guests with powerful stories that will continue to uplift and inspire all of you. Now, here are some concluding words of wisdom. Our thoughts can be powerful allies, but when left unchecked, they can also become quite saboteurs. Negative thinking patterns have a way of repeating themselves until they slowly shape how we see ourselves, others, and the world around us. Over time, those unchallenged thoughts can erode confidence, create anxiety, and build emotional walls that limit our growth. Therapy offers a safe space to examine those thoughts, question them, and replace them with healthier perspectives. Just as we maintain our physical health through regular care, our minds deserve the same consistent attention. Ignoring harmful thoughts patterns doesn't make them disappear. It often gives them more power. So when we commit to reflection, support, and healing, we begin reclaiming control over our inner dialogue. A healthier mind creates a stronger foundation for a happier and more meaningful life. My name is Dr. Dan Amzallag, and you may all keep pursuing your amazing journey in life. Stay tuned for the next episode.